Derek Bolt here. Today's lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about another tool, recent tool, ChatGPT, and how you can use it in your tactical writing. Some of these slides are based on some work by Yang Kang. So what is ChatGPT? So ChatGPT is its name is short for Chat Generative Pre-trained Transformer, and we'll talk a little bit about how that happens in just a little bit. It's trained on large data sets from the internet with lots and lots of human feedback that went into its training. Uh, the tool basically mines, models, and aggregates information to produce writing. And it produces grammatical and syntactically correct sentences, which is actually one of its strengths. The output is very strong grammatically. It basically produces unique outputs, randomized unique outputs. So in some senses, ChatGPT is not plagiarizing in the traditional sense because it's not a direct copy. But in many places, its output is not considered acceptable, so you're going to have to make sure you're allowed to use it wherever you're looking at. Importantly, one of the things I want to point out is it doesn't understand what it produces. It's not sentient. It's not artificial intelligence in the sense of what most people think of the word intelligence to mean. It will gladly just hallucinate stuff, but because it's so grammatical and syntactically set and sounds good, many people now think it is a kind of intelligence, and so of course the media is full of calling it AI. To me, it's just a machine learning tool that does a very particular task. It does it pretty well for some things and pretty badly for others, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So if we want to look at its history and what it's been doing, it actually started in 2018. GPT-1 was the first ChatGPT, generative pre-trained transformer, and it had 117 million parameters and was trained largely on just web text. It generated moderately coherent and grammatically correct text, but it had lots of nonsensical and potentially repetitive responses. It went through the next year. It was significantly scaled up. You can see it went from 117 to 1.5 billion parameters. And that number of parameters gave it a lot more ability to learn in terms of the machine learning it's doing on this stuff. Now it was trained on web text, books, and articles. And it could start generating text that started to be indistinguishable from human writing. It looked really good for certain kinds of things. And the question and answering text completion was much better. It was added as functionality wrapped around the core GPT transformer. 2020, they expanded it again, and we now have 175 billion parameters, so another 2 orders of magnitude increase. Now it's trained on web pages, books, scientific papers, and a whole lot more stuff it can get to through the internet. It generates incredibly realistic-like text, and now it has added functionality like doing translation, summarization, and even coding. You can simply ask ChatGPT to generate code for you, and sometimes a little good job. Sometimes it's a little tricky. And then this year, so there were some variations of this. The ChatGPT was actually taken from GPT-3 based on GPT 3.5. And it incorporates human feedback in the loop and training to better align with human users' intent and the kinds of questions you want to ask. It also added some guardrails to make sure it couldn't do things they didn't want it to. And now we have ChatGPT 4, which was trained, I don't remember the number of parameters, but it's slightly larger, but more of what was added was a lot more of the guardrails around the edge. So what is a transformer and how did we get here? And just a little bit so you can understand where some of the limitations are going to come from. So the idea of a transformer architecture is it takes a bunch of inputs, it goes through aspects of the neural network that are trying to figure out where things in the image or the text are important. And so the original training for the transformer was based on doing image captioning, or for GPT was based on doing like image captioning. So here I have an image, it's got a highlighted region of a person, and then a phrase, a woman is throwing a frisbee in a park. And this system has to learn to use the transformer's attention mechanism to figure out where is the woman and also to relate the two words between the two. But this multimodal stuff gives it an alignment question. Most of ChatGPT's training is pure text, but it can still try and use this attention mechanism to figure out what words are related to other words and how that is important as we go through the processing of the text. It also gives it a way in terms of making sure the attention, in terms of matching the grammar from the things it's read. And then there's a part of the process that's going to use reinforcement learning from human feedback. So if you have some prompt and you get some explanation, you can actually have it label, humans can go in and say, well, of these answers, D is better than C is better than A, which is about equal to B. You rank them all, and then you put that into a reward model, into a function that says, okay, I'm going to try and generate things more like D whenever I see an input like A, or sorry, an input like this prompt. So you go through this process of trying to figure out what are the expected answers humans want out of that, and you again put this into a reward function. You let it go train. So you take the prompted data. A lot of them had human labels demonstrate the desired behavior. You use that and you fine tune the model. So you take the model that was trained first from just raw text using the transformer. That's the pre-trained part. And now you use human label data to fine tune it and make it better. You then take, after it gets good enough that it starts producing reasonable outputs, you take the reinforcement learning approach I just mentioned, where you go through different ranked labels, put them together, and get your model. And then you actually have a policy that looks at that, but also has a constraint algorithm that's going to be used to make sure it's doing certain things. So if there's a new prompt, you start from the supervised data. The supervised data generated from this, you generate an output, and then you can compute whether or not you're happy with that, and you can iterate. This is the reward, again, retraining. But you can also use some policies to look at that generated text and say, no, that's not consistent with some policy. There's a policy violation. And then you can make the network so it's more likely to stay within policy by iterating this loop. And at runtime, you can even decide if you violated certain things. You can make some random perturbations and go back and make it generate new data. So that's a general review. But you can see it doesn't have a real model of sentience. It's not even applying logic. It's just applying this transformer input to output with a little bit of rules to clean stuff up. So what does ChatGPT do well? The things it does really well are it can summarize, providing some level of background information. You give it a bunch of text and say, summarize this, it can do that. It can mimic the style of various writers. So I can say, write in the style of Mark Twain, and it will approximate that, right? It's more, in my view, it has some variations of what it does is you mimic the styles, but it's limited and doesn't really quite capture it for some people, and for other people's, it gets very close. It depends on how easy they were to mimic. It can actually do outlines and generate ideas, and so you can use it from a research point of view, and we'll show an example of trying to use some of that. But in my view, the thing it really does is it can fix grammar, and it's pretty good at that. So we'll come back and showing you that, which is related to the summarization ability. But if you're going to use it in your writing, while it can fix many writing problems by correcting grammar and things, it rarely improves any thinking problems in your writing. In fact, it can exacerbate some of the bad thinking that can show up in writing because it can take you off on tangents. So you got to be a little careful how you use it. When you ask it to improve your writing, it's going to improve the grammar and syntax, and it may make your logic a little bit worse. It may get some things you didn't see, so there's some value in looking at it that way. But so the capabilities that I have that are make it unique, and actually part of what makes it seem intelligent is that it remembers what users said earlier in the conversation. You can have multiple conversations going on, but because it remembers things you said before, that gives it a sense of intelligence. It's really just a giant buffer of things it's got to go back and look at. And that allows users to provide follow-up corrections. So if you're not happy with the answer, you can tell it what it got wrong so it can learn from it. This is how it's getting lots of human inputs as well, although there were many paid trainers in the beginning. But you can also use it to get, like if you're not happy with the output, you can refine the prompt and you can get better at getting the outputs. And the system has been trained to decline certain inappropriate requests, and people have fun trying to get it to go off the lines. In terms of its limitations, by far the biggest problem I see with it is it can generate incorrect or fictitious information. This hallucination can cause you lots of difficulties, and one thing you have to be very careful when you're using it in your writing, because that could be a giveaway that you've used bad information, and the reviewers won't care if you did it with ChatGPT or if you just got it all wrong yourself. You want to be careful in terms of the information. It's currently limited to stuff, this is 2023, to stuff trained through 2021, which is what his base training was. So more current facts, it's not going to get right, and we'll see some examples of that. And then it may produce harmful or biased content because it was trained on internet-based data with various things, and we already know there's lots of bias in the internet towards, for example, the U.S. and EU and first world nations, right? They dominate the internet, therefore the content is biased towards whatever those people have out there. The fictitious stuff also comes back because when it's trained, if it wants to be able to write like Mark Twain, it's been trained on Mark Twain's reading, Some things it's trained on are factual and some things are not factual. And that's the harmful information it can generate can be because it's read some things that are biased and then can reproduce some of what that biased or inflammatory comments have. So some of the things it does very poorly, things to be careful of if you're thinking of using this with. It does not provide a line of reasoning to support a claim. So if you ask it to generate stuff, sometimes you can ask it, and if it's a small enough material to read and then a small enough amount of material, and if it's been trained and seen some of that data in training, it may actually provide a line of reasoning to support a claim. It tends to do much worse on this for complex things or more novel things. It really doesn't do a great job of nuanced relationships among ideas. So if I have two or three things and I ask it to compare and contrast them, sometimes it does a good job, and lots of times it misses nuances about what you were trying to get because the words are mapped to some of the same kinds of concepts in its simplistic representation. It's not good at all for a writing process and revision. If I ask it to revise something, it'll gladly revise it 3 or 4 times. But because of the underlying aspects that have to do with its generation process, it's not necessarily fixing it. It can like add back an error it had before. It'll do some weird things in a process. So you want to keep your writing process as we go through the technical process. You're driving that, and don't think that ChatGPT can ever replace that for you, at least not now. It's not really good at rhetorical contests. If you tell it to talk about writing for a particular audience, it's generally not going to do that well. The best way I've seen to do that is to actually tell it to mimic the style of somebody who wrote for such an audience. So if I'm writing for a particular scientific audience in physics, I can say, write in the style of Albert Einstein. That might actually help it write in a style the audience will like. But it doesn't really get the rhetorical context of understanding what words that audience will know and not know, and working towards audience in terms of their personalities and what they're going to use. It doesn't do self-reflection at all. It doesn't have a concept. Again, you can ask it to. It'll generate stuff. It's personal. It doesn't have a personal experience, so it doesn't really have an authentic voice. It can mimic voices. So that if you ask it to tell stories about something from a personal point of view, it struggles a lot more in producing good quality outputs. It's terrible at verifiable sources and quotations. ChatGPT 3.5 was the free version that's out right now. Was particularly bad at this. So when I was first playing with it last year, I asked it to generate 20 quotes from Kendall Haven, the author of Storyproof, which I use his story-based stuff in this text as well. And it generated 20 quotes, and I said, oh, this is great, it's going to be useful. And then I started reading the quotes, and I realized, I've read a lot of his work, and these don't seem quite right. So I actually started using more detailed things, and 18 of the 20 quotes it made up were just fake. One was actually a proper quote, but wasn't from Kendall, it was from somebody else. Then one was a partial quote, which might have actually been correct, because I haven't read everything. Maybe it showed up in some blog post where he posted or whatever. But in general, the quotes weren't quite right. So be very careful. And if you ask it for citations, I'll go through an example. It gets them wrong. ChatGPT 4 will do a little bit better because it'll say no. It currently doesn't analyze visuals, video, other multimedia. There are other generative tools for generating those things, but analyzing them is a little tricky. ChatGPT 3.5 was really bad at the sustained analysis of very long text. It can handle a buffer of like 4,000 characters or words. And so it can't deal with long things and then analyze them and summarize them. But ChatGPT 3 or ChatGPT 4 came up with a bunch of plugins that basically take the data, break it up into blocks, and then process it block by block. And by doing that, it can do things. So there's some things that can load a PDF, and then you can ask questions about what's in your PDF. And it can do that under the cover by looping over many calls to ChatGPT to get things done. That's only the paid version right now, though. For idea generation, it can be hit or miss. Some of the ideas and responses it generates are wrong or impossible. It doesn't really know the difference between fact and fiction. So it's seen stuff, and if you ask it to generate things, it may do it. That can actually be great for idea generation as long as you're the one who's going to go back and think about, are those reasonable and can I use those? And remember the computer science adage of garbage in, garbage out. It was trained on the internet, and so it's got a lot of garbage in. So be careful what you can get out. So just some examples of some use cases you can get to it. So you can use it to make up a fairy tale story. It can generate all kinds of interesting, fun little things. It's actually better at those because the facts don't matter. So you can ask it to do things. It can actually be useful somewhat for writing or debugging code, which nothing we'll talk about in this class. You can also try and use it to write a research report, and we'll go through some of those examples. And then it does language translation, like Google Translate does. The English it produces is pretty good, so in that sense, it's a useful tool if you're trying to look at some translation stuff. But I don't have enough knowledge of foreign languages. Even my Spanish is not good enough that I can't tell if it does a great job of keeping the translation correct. But it probably can, because we have a lot of those things that it could be trained on and get them well. Although I'm talking about this from the ChatGPT, there's a lot of competition in this space. So Google has a tool called Bard, which is based on its large language model, and they're investing a bunch in continuing to produce this. Baidu, a Chinese company, has its own ChatGPT product, ErnieBot, which is being widely used there. And Tencent, another Chinese company, has also released another conversion product that they're working on internally. This space is moving very quickly, and things are being integrated. So ChatGPT has been used by Microsoft now, who's invested in OpenAI, and it's integrated with things like Word and PowerPoint and Microsoft Teams and Excel. And Amazon is using it in various places. So as more and more people find various places where this can be effectively used, it's going to keep growing. Just as an example, so Microsoft Teams Premium uses ChatGPT to take notes and to make remote meeting collaboration more efficient. Getting a transcript of a meeting is nice, but summarization, which is one of the things ChatGPT is good at, can make it much more useful to get the results out of a meeting. You can also use it to generate CSV files. You can use it because it can do programming to generate things that can be pretty useful in terms of using it to improve the productivity in an office. I've used it for generating code. Many of my students have used it for little pieces like that. Microsoft is also integrated with Bing. I've not actually got to use it, gone looking for it, but the chat mode is only available in the beta version, or was when I looked at it last fall. But its ability to connect with real data could be useful. It's got commercial potential, using it for copywriting and types of things. So, here's a company that's already making blog posts 10 times faster by using ChatGPT. And so you can basically give it some ideas, and then you can still structure what you want the post to be, and then you can use it to fill in text. And we'll see some examples. I'm using it in my writing as well, and I'll show you how I use it. So there's a bunch of plugins that can make a lot of stuff easy. So you can use it to generate various kinds of things. Summaries are good. Its coding is okay in various ways. It's useful for doing format checking, whether you follow the format rules of a certain journal by giving examples. It's really good at grammar checking and polishing a paragraph. We'll go through those examples. Maybe to rephrase a paper to reduce the similarity score, or to reduce the relationship, so I can say, make this paragraph much smaller. We'll see those examples. So here's an example that's pretty straightforward. If I wanted to generate a proposal for an AI game theory book, you could go to ChatGPT and ask it to do that, and it'll give you a book overview and an outline of various chapters. Because this is a high-level concept, it's really a summary of stuff that's out in the field. It can take a bunch of related ideas, and again, it's going to take thousands of characters. It's going to take what it knows plus the prompt you gave it, and say, now I'm going to generate what are the most likely words that will follow next, and it generates a bunch of stuff. All of these are relatively reasonable subsections to have in a book. I can also ask it to format in whatever particular format you want. So, okay at those kinds of things. The kinds of things I think it's really good at is being able to rephrase and work on grammar. That's what I'm using it mostly for. So if you have an abstract, so here's a raw abstract, you could say, can you rephrase it? It will take it in and rewrite it. So ChatGPT is an extremely hot topic since its inception, has become highly discussed topic since its inception. So it's going to change the words around. Extremely hot topic, maybe closer to the way I might talk, is not necessarily as formal. So if I'm trying to make it more formal writing, it would do that. And then you can ask it to polish it. And generally, there's a distinction between rephrasing and polishing. Rephrasing, it tries to say it's closer to what you say. Polishing, it's going to generally elaborate it and make it a little fluffier, in my view. But it'll add more to it to make it sound more professional in whatever concept it's thinking and the word means. So just as an example, I'm going to go through. Now, one of the ways I've been using it is to actually combine this with voice typing. So I'll go into like a Google Doc, I'll choose voice typing, and I will dictate stuff. And dictation gets some things right and some things wrong. It's not as clean. So for example, dictation doesn't get punctuation and capitalization. There's probably some words missing in here, although the dictation is also trying to add, make sense out of stuff. So I can go in and I can have it take my raw text, I'll cut and paste that, put in ChatGPT, have it correct it, and asking it to correct your grammar it tries to stick as reasonably close to what you do. But if I look at the end here, as we go through this examples, right, grammatically incorrect, this and examples don't match up. It should be this example or these examples. It's going to go ahead and fix things. So as we delve into the examples discussed in this section, I strongly recommend, right? So this is literally a chapter that is going to show up in the book, or a version of it. It's probably been edited since then, but it'll go through and do that. So, sometimes especially when I'm talking, I have too many words, I make things longer. And sometimes when you're working towards, especially proposals, they'll sometimes say you get 500 words or 200 words or 100. One of the things is actually very useful for is you put your ideas together in a longer form, and then you say, reduce that in length by 25%. And they'll go down and it'll try to keep the most relevant things. Now, it's not perfect, so you got to be careful when it goes through that, but it's a great way when you're stuck with, I've got to make this fit in 500 characters to get it shortened if you're trying to do things quickly. So this is about efficiency. I don't think it makes my writing, making it shorter, it's not doing a better job than if I made it shorter. It's just doing it with less effort on my part. So it's an efficiency hack. Now to go to some of the things that have some difficulty. So if I try to use this for research and I try to ask it to get a literature review or find me, the relevant references. So here I asked it to show a literature review of open set recognition with citations. This is an example I did with ChatGPT 3.5 last year. And this is my research area, so I know all the papers in this area probably. So the first sentence, this summary is probably okay. And then it has these four, it actually had much more as with the dots are, the ellipsis. But, so these sound good. To somebody who does not know the field, this might look really good. Lee has worked in the field, Schreier's worked in the field, Bolton Bandali, these are right. These people have worked in the field. These ideas are somewhat related to what's going on in the field. So it sounds really good. But if I actually go look at the references, the Bandali Bolt paper that it's talking about is not about DNA. It's about Open Max, which is one of the other titles. So what you can get out of this is that it took a bunch of the ideas, but it got them all mixed together. And that's because when it's looking from a probabilistic point of view, it can't decide. It knows that Bandali and Bolt were somehow related to this idea. And there's this thing called Open Max that showed up, but Open Max shows up in my work, right? And there's another work by G, but not by Lee, right? And so it's getting them wrong. So I followed up and asked it to generate citations. It generated a bunch of citations. And again, these all look good. They are structurally formatted as references would be. I could even ask them to put them in BibTeX, which is the style I use. But there's a problem with these, because if I go look at them, I'm going to take most of these. I'll go back. Most of these are just wrong, right? They're not completely correct. So I'll just take one of them, which is this one here, which is actually our first paper in this area. And it has a reference, and it's got lots of the words correct, but the actual proper citation, right? This link here is supposed to be a full, the link, if you click on it, it'll go to the paper. If you click on that link, it actually takes you to this paper, sparse subspace cluster. It has nothing to do with this reference. The correct reference, right, is close, got lots of the words right. Should have been 2012, and it should have had this link, right? So close, but not quite there. Is that a positive impact? I don't know if ChatGPT for research is good in that sense. You have to be very careful. ChatGPT 4, the commercial version, is a little bit better. If you ask it the same question, it'll say, I'm sorry for the confusion. I can't provide specific citations. I don't have real-time access. So there was enough feedback and enough articles about ChatGPT's problems that they went back and they tried to fix it. And so then it'll just give you an example where it have placeholders and put stuff in, but it doesn't really, again, some of the science in the summary is okay, some of it's wrong. So again, the comparison in one case is going to say no, and the other case is going to give you stuff. This I think is actually better. It's a step forward for ChatGPT to begin to say, I don't know. I'm not going to answer those questions. And open set research, which is what I do, is all about making machines say, I don't know. It's very hard to have them understand their limitations. I believe this limitation is coming from the wrapper, the sort process around the system that's sort of saying, when I see this kind of question, just give this as an answer. If I ask the question differently in the right way, I can get it to still give me invalid things here and there. But how are you going to use this in your work? Well, one possibility is to actually use it by doing things where you can ask it to get ideas and then follow up with real research. So, for example, if I asked it, ChatGPT, for current trends in cybersecurity threats, I'm asking it to generate ideas for me. It'll generate this list of things: ransomware attacks, critical infrastructure, AI-driven cyber attacks, supply chains. Okay, so first, what's wrong? What's the limitation? I'm just going to pause for a second. Think about what's wrong, given what I've talked about with ChatGPT's limitations. What's wrong with asking it for this? So again, remember the limitation. It was trained through 2021. So if I'm looking for the word current trends, I'm using the word current trends, I'm looking for things that are recent, maybe more recent than 2021. So I'm in trouble when I ask those questions. On the other hand, the things that were currently trending in 2021 might still be relevant today. So in terms of the trends, so I could take those phrases, I can take the actual phrase trends in cybersecurity, I can put that in Google. I can take each of these terms. And this can be useful when you're trying to do research and you're not sure about all the words used in an area. It'll give you a bunch of terms that sort of prompt you to say, oh yeah, that's a good term, I'll go add that. I can actually go back into Google Scholar and use Survey Review to see if there's surveys. So I can use this as a way of giving myself some ideas to go look for, but then validate the research in Google Scholar. Don't just trust what comes out of ChatGPT. Use it as, oh, that's an idea, I'll go look at it, as though you're chatting with somebody else who might be equally not quite an expert, so you're not going to use them for credibility, you're going to use them for ideas and then go play with that. So this can be useful. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but you can actually use it for, if I ask it for project guidance or stuff, it can generate some ideas, but again, you have to be a little careful of what you're going to do. You can use it for coding, not very relevant for this class, but some of you are CS majors or whatever. So this is interesting. I just want to show this as an example also of some of the problems. So I asked it to generate Python for a particular mathematical function. It generated code, but that code didn't actually run. So I asked, so you'll notice here in the code, there's this variable P0. What's P0 in the above code? Oh, so this is part of how ChatGPT gets to learn. When it makes mistakes, humans who know enough who are trying to use it try and fix it. And so now it goes back and says, oh, I've got to add P0 to my argument list, and explains what's going on. So it's this, one sense, makes it look like it's intelligent because it missed something, and then when you ask it what to do. But its ability to do this stuff is still, the code is somewhat mixed. So be careful when you go to trust it. You can also ask it to generate code to analyze data and things like that. So for those of you who are not coders, that's going to actually give you an opportunity to move forward and do stuff. In terms of some of its negative, right, because it can generate stuff and generate stuff that sounds plausible on the surface but is wrong, a lot of journals and conferences are basically banned it. You can't use it. I actually argued against it in our community because, as I said, I like to use it to correct grammar. If you're using Grammarly, which is another tool that has a large language model inside of it for grammar correction, is that not allowed, right? So where do you start drawing the line? So it's a slippery slope. But you need to be aware as a writer that if you're submitting it places, there are places you can't use it. In your other classes here at UCCS, you need to be aware of whatever the campus's policy are. The course's policy are. Campus doesn't have a policy. So if a faculty says you can use it, you can use it. If they say you can't, don't. And there are tools that are out there to try and do it. In fact, OpenAI had one. They actually took it down recently because it wasn't accurate enough. And so when they first started, the accuracy was higher, but as the system continues to evolve, it got worse, and so it was easy to defeat the system, or moderately easy. If you can defeat it 50% of the time, it's not clear. But it also may say, there may be false positives, so it may say something that was not generated. This was actually why they took it down. There would be lots of things that were actually human generated that the AI, the system was saying, no, this was generated by the AI. And that false positive could get people in trouble, could cause problems, so that they took away the tool. But Campus still is a tool that we use when your submissions go through. Turn it in, it can check for AI generation. And the policy in this class is if I tell you to use it, like this week's assignment, use it. If I tell you not to use it, don't, but there's only a few times we'll do that. And then otherwise, if you use it, I want you to just cite it as part of your answers. And some of you have been doing that in the homeworks already. But when it comes to other classes, follow their rules. A faculty member will read this. And so far, I had my students try and test me. I had a bunch of them generate stuff. And I was pretty good at picking out this was not your writing, because the style of the writing changes. And this is part of what makes it different when you try and use it in a document is it's not you, right? It's like ChatGPT, or if you tell it to write like somebody else, but it's not going to have enough of your background to write like you. So in conclusion, it's a powerful tool that could revolutionize the ways scholars approach research and the way you can do certain kinds of writing. In my view, it's really by saving time and increasing efficiency, it can help you focus on the most important aspects of your work. The critical thinking and the analysis. What you want to write is still up to you. It may just make you more efficient at getting that to come out. It tends to hallucinate, and you need to check anything it produces. Anytime there's a fact or a reference, you want to be careful to go check it. Be careful overusing ChatGPT. If you're going to use it for writing and submissions for conferences or for proposals, you need to understand the rules of what is and is not allowed. Last I checked, NSF was still working on the rules for the use of ChatGPT. Again, trying to deal with the subtle thing of it's okay if you're going to use it to summarize or shorten, but not okay for generating. And how do you structure that? And how would they enforce it? And if you can't enforce it, you don't want to have a rule that's not enforceable. As these continue to evolve, it's going to be exciting to see how they're going to help. Are they going to make things better and more efficient, or are they going to make things much worse and make things bad? So, thank you.